Hello, and you are welcome to this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monahan, and this week I'm joined by the Ireland editor of the Irish Independent, Fionnán Sheahan. Fionnán, thank you for joining me this week. I wanted to jump straight into migration. It became a big issue in the political agenda this week. I'm not overly surprised, particularly because we had obviously what happened in City West, then we had the attack in Drogheda. But then the government decided to announce earlier on this week that they were going to start charging international protection applicants a contribution payment for those who are staying in the accommodation. What did you make of the timing of the announcement of that?
Yeah, and go back further, back to the previous week when everybody was on midterm break, and Simon Harris suddenly deciding out of the blue that migration numbers were too high and there's something needed to be done about the system that Fine Gael have been in charge of for the last 15 years as they've held the justice portfolio in every government up until earlier on this year when Jim Gavin took over. And you're looking at that going, oh, is that just because you've taken a thumping at the ballot box in the presidential election and you've done a knee-jerk reaction here and decided actually migration is the space that we now need to occupy? And you were looking at Simon Harris going, okay, now he's setting the agenda here. He's got in ahead of Micheál Martin, who is still kind of licking his wounds and fighting fires in his party over the election response. So you were looking at it at the politicking of this issue. And also curious use of the language, migration numbers are too high. So what? There's too many foreign nationals working in hospitals. There's too many carers who are foreign nationals.
Tech industry.
There's too many people who are on work permits in specialised job in the tech and farm industry. Is that what he's talking about? No, actually he's talking about asylum the international protection system, and when people come to the country, the length of time it takes to process their application, that's a government problem. How long they're here for, the system in terms of rejection of applications, appeals on those rejections, and how the system filters through such that if you fail in your asylum application, how are you departing from the country or removed from the country? And that's all government issue really that hasn't been addressed over recent times. So you've to factor that in. Also, yes, you did have the backdrop of the pretty horrific attack above in Drogheda at Halloween weekend, and also the previous week the City West attack. So yeah, you'd say it was curious. Now, from a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael perspective, it probably played quite well for them because ultimately they had the left-wing parties attacking them on their use of language, on the measures that they were implementing here. So they'll be quite happy from a political perspective, but look, job well done. Because when you look at what was Simon Harris talking about, well, not really clear. What is this system then that they're going to introduce in terms of charging for accommodation? How is it going to work? Who's going to regulate it? How is it going to be carried out?
We don't know. Yeah, there's we only got some details because it was discussed at the Cabinet Subcommittee on Migration. So it's going to be based on income. It'll be anything from €15 to €238. They'll obviously have a system in place. We don't know if it's going to be a third-party provider. Again, we found out that if it is a third-party provider, it could cost anything up to €1.68 million to set up in the first year. So a substantial amount of money, and then potentially €740,000 in a maintenance service every year after that. But the government don't think this is going to be a revenue generating system, particularly because they don't have an enforcement mechanism in place. So you kind of wonder, okay, well, what's the point in this?
And what are you going to do then if somebody doesn't pay?
They can't do anything.
You're kicking them out onto the street. You're asking for a contribution, and in return then what are people getting? And are you doing this in order to encourage them to leave the state provided accommodation and go out into the private market? And well, we know that that's already over, too little supply, too much demand. So the logic behind it, beyond the politics, seemed to be a bit lacking. But it was seen to be, you know what, we're getting tough on immigration.
Yeah, firm but fair. We keep
Yeah.
hearing that our system's going to be firm, but it's going to be fair. Like what you said, they can't kick them out because there's EU laws in relation to that. When people come over seeking international protection, they are entitled to accommodation. So that, we know that won't be able to happen. There is no enforcement. Potentially they do debt collection and they might have to go to the courts in relation to that. People won't be able to apply for citizenship if they haven't paid for it. We do know a number of different countries in the EU do have a system like this, so it's not like the government is going out completely on a limb. But there was also something else that the meeting was told, the ministers in that subcommittee was told, was that there is a worry that if, you know, a great part of people coming over here and integrating is getting a job and actually earning an income and becoming part of a community. But if their income goes up, or even if they decide to earn an income, it could be a disincentive. This contribution could be a disincentive. So I just wonder, have they fully, like, they know that that's an issue, and I just wonder how that is going to play out on the ground.
Yeah, so if people in international protection are going for a job within the labour market where there are vacancies, that we're still at very high levels of employment. Does this then mean that they pull back and they don't take up that job? And very often these are low paying jobs, possibly with employers who couldn't get anybody else anyway. So yeah, the thought process there. It's also lacking in terms of what is the wider picture here. We're still unclear from Jim Gavin, the Minister for Justice perspective, what is his long-term policy in terms of accommodation? Because we've a long-standing report, I think, done by Catherine Day, former European Commission Secretary General, so on and so forth, senior ranking civil servant in the EU. She does a report, says build 6 big hubs around the country and accommodate people in those. Jim Gavin comes in and goes, well, I'm not doing that, and we haven't done it anyway over the last 5 or 6 years. But then the state goes off and buys City West, which is it's a big hub, and then presumably there is a plan to match that elsewhere. So the overall plan is just a bit lacking at the moment. What's the overarching vision here? Where do they see it going? What are the projections in terms of figures coming in? I mean, you had the Taoiseach saying, you know, I mean, most of these people are coming in across the border. Okay, I mean, what are you going to do? So you're going to put up checkpoints and patrols at the border?
Been there before.
Yeah, you're going to have checks at sea and not at land. So, you know,
God, Brexit flashbacks there.
Yeah, you're coming down from Newry to Dundalk, and suddenly there's a road checkpoint. You know, that's kind of a bit of nonsense, really, given what we've gone through over the last decade. So yeah, we're really not seeing what's the bigger picture here in terms of an overall plan, apart from coming out and saying we're getting tough on migration.
What we're saying, though, is a change in rhetoric, especially in the last few weeks. Like, we know the government from the outset of this, since they formed, that they were going to change the approach. We have the EU Migration Pact that's coming in, so that's going to change the rules around that. So the government are going to have to adhere to, you know, those first instance decisions in relation to an international protection applicant will have to be done within 6 months. We know people who seek international protection can only work after 6 months. So there just seems to be a few things that haven't fully locked into place there. What do you make of the rhetoric change in the last few weeks?
Yeah, they're walking along a line now. They're not quite crossing it, but you just have to be careful, because it doesn't take a whole lot for people who are on the extremes in an argument like this to say, oh, you were saying the exact same thing as us. And then government is trying to defend itself and say, well, no, we're not saying that, we're actually saying this, so we're not quite agreeing with you. So there is that difficult. We've been seeing this already. We've been seeing people in the far right saying, we've been saying this all along, the government wasn't listening to us, and now they're reacting because they got a bloody nose in the general election. It does strike one that we're not yet, you bring in the EU Migration Pact, we're not yet getting a whole bunch of evidence that the application system, the time that's going to be taken there, is going to change all that dramatically. There's certainly been a long-term argument there that applications are taking too long, and very definitely the appeals commission route was also taking an exorbitant amount of time. And then at the end of that process, what exactly happened to somebody who had failed and failed again? So until government actually sets that out, we're in the dark here.
Who ultimately wins from this from a political point of view? Because you spoke about the opposition, and they really have gone hell for leather in relation, particularly on Simon Harris's rhetoric. You know, some have compared him to going down the Nigel Farage route, saying that it was a dog whistle, that his comments were reckless. Or is it better for the government because they are able to say, no, we are being firm? Like, I know we're a long way out from an election, but we didn't see immigration much of an issue in the last general
It
election.
didn't flare up in the manner in which we thought
Yeah.
it would, but nonetheless, it was there in the background. Got to watch Sinn Féin's position on this as well. There was accusations from elsewhere on the left that Sinn Féin were in with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, that they were arguing both sides of the equation, where Labour and the Social Democrats and people before profit are very much not of the view that the system needs to be fair, but we don't need a hardline stance being adopted. So Sinn Féin's position is interesting, because then the two coalition parties, just by dint of hardening their language a bit, get to split this all-new united left straight away.
I thought it was interesting, actually, yeah, because I heard Ivana Bacik kind of criticising Sinn Féin and the rhetoric that they had used earlier in the week. And actually, when I was in Leinster House, I said in the office it was very early splinterings of that left alliance already.
The first item on the agenda is the split, as is traditionally the saying about people coming together on the left. So that's an interesting one, because definitely Sinn Féin have had their difficulties around the migration issue over recent years. They've been changing their own policies, their own language that they have been using. So yeah, it's probably both those on the left and government parties will be quite happy with how it's played out. If the government are being criticised by the opposition on one like this, they won't be all that perturbed.
Yeah, let's move on to Fianna Fáil. They had the parliamentary party meeting on Wednesday. Now, Micheál Martin wasn't there. He's over in Brazil. He's attending COP, which I think
was away, so the mice did play, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we expected it to be massive amount of fireworks, but there was anger at the parliamentary party meeting by all accounts. In particular, the TDs who were named on the so-called rebel list, or the naughty list, as I think it was described at the parliamentary party meeting. Do they have a fair point that some within government are undermining backbenchers?
Yeah, so we published this story a week ago, and you'd have to say the people who were on the list weren't all that surprising. So there was a list floating around, seemingly provided by somebody within government, of what we call the naughty list. But it was basically the rebels and the
old guard.
The old guard. And basically the rebels were a list of people who have either A kind of sided with the Billy Keller camp during the Fianna Fáil presidential convention, where Billy Keller was taking on Jim Gavin, or B, been critical of Micheál Martin and his handling of the presidential election, or being kind of more longer term critics of his. So they were the rebels. It wasn't a terribly exhaustive list. There was a few people who I thought were missing off the list. And then there was the old guard, which is kind of veteran TDs who it's believed are not all that happy with Micheál Martin. Now, nobody was actually suggesting that all these people were going to put their name down on a letter
to
propose a motion of no confidence, because within the various aspects of the list, you could then create subsets and splinters and so on. So I'm not really buying it that this is the number of people who would sign a motion of no confidence letter. It's not, but it very definitely is people who are becoming increasingly vocal about their views about the leadership and direction of the party. Could you add in others though into that list as well? Yeah, you probably could. So there does seem to be a growing group within Fianna Fáil who are not happy with the direction of things, particularly in the last 12 months. And that's a factor of a bigger party. You come in with larger numbers. Micheál Martin makes his picks then. He picks his cabinet ministers. He picks his junior ministers. He gives a few consolation prizes of Oireachtas committees, but he's basically telling everybody else, I don't rate you.
Yeah.
And especially if you're a second term TD at this stage, I still don't rate you, is what he's saying, because he hasn't promoted them up to the ministerial ranks. So people are in a position like that are basically going, I'm never going to be promoted by Micheál Martin. So, there's not a whole lot in it for me to stay loyal to him. A list of diehard loyalists would also be interesting. There's a number of teachers' pets within the Fianna Fáil parliamentary party, particularly amongst the senators and amongst some of the new TDs. That if it came down to a vote, it would only be the TDs who would count. But we saw that during the Jim Gavin, Billy Keller item playing out. I suppose also the manner in which 25 TD, senators, MEPs didn't vote for Micheál Martin's choice
That's a lot.
of presidential election candidate was a big deal in its own right. Even factoring in Billy Kelleher's own loyalties and people knowing him over his time within the party, it did seem to be a good bulk, particularly because some of them hadn't declared it publicly. We knew about who half of those people were. There was others who were speculated upon, but they didn't come up publicly and say they weren't going down that route. So what happened at the PP meeting was there was a bit of whinging and complaining about people being identified on this list and who was identifying them on it. And Mary Butler, the chief whip, saying she didn't know anything about any list and there's no list and so on and so forth. You're kind of going, give me a Rick. There is
Well, there was a list.
There was a list. And there's also, people know who the disgruntled ones are in the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party at this stage.
Yeah, the list doesn't help the disquiet and the unhappiness within the party, but where does it go from here?
From a bit of a throwback to bygone Fianna Fáil as
Which
well.
is what Micheál Martin said.
Yeah. And he said, there's no list. And you're kind of going, well, there is a list, Micheál.
There was a list, and he did say, this is kind of harks back to his time as a young Fianna Fáil TD, and that's the way that Fianna Fáil was, and that's not how it works the party.
So the hockey era, he probably wasn't there for the worst of the hockey era. He came in the late 80s, early 80s were probably the worst period in that regard. But there were subsequent heaves that he was there for as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a throwback to those days. So hence he wants to say, oh no. But I mean, Micheál Martin is also going around saying, I didn't push Jim Gavin. This is not a top-down party. So you're kind of going, Jesus, Micheál, would you give us a break? You did push Jim Gavin, and this is a top-down party.
So where does it go from here? Do you think it'll centre on the review? Do you think Micheál Martin is still okay? He's going to last at least until 2027?
The famous review. So let's see what the review says, because the review probably is going to take a bit longer than we thought. You're hearing that there's more people looking to make submissions to the review and to be interviewed by the review panel, so that could take a bit longer. And we're hearing that the scope of it is ever widening as a result of that, a result of a growing number of people wanting to give their contributions. And notably, the Taoiseach himself hasn't been interviewed yet.
Yeah, and we're expecting it next week. I think the middle of next week it was meant to be completed. Anyway.
Yeah, so they'll have their work cut out from that regard. Micheál Martin's away at COP down in Brazil this weekend off solving the issues of the world rather than solving the issues of Fianna Fáil. The easier job, I suppose. So he's there. So he's not back till the weekend. So when did I get to talk to him? Interesting nonetheless that they're leaving him till last.
Why are we not seeing the same level of disquiet in Fine Gael that we're seeing in Fianna Fáil? Fine Gael did not have a good election. The campaign was not good.
Disastrous election. And
is it because a lot of them are new TDs?
It's because you've largely a batch of new TDs. Some of them were only finding their feet, and some of them were pure delighted to be in there in the first place. Who never thought that they would become TDs, and now unexpectedly, because largely speaking of this mass exodus from the party that you had, a rake of people have come in off the back of that. So as a result of that, Simon Harris got a very new parliamentary party. Most of everybody who is not a first-time TD is either currently a minister or has previously been a minister. So there's not, everybody's had a turn on the roundabout, I suppose, as a result of that. And the new TDs aren't expecting they're going to get performance like that at this early stage. So yeah, he is kind of, he's living a charmed existence in that regard. I suppose you go back to the opinion poll last weekend in the Sunday Independent. What was notable about it was the manner in which the public turned on Micheál Martin. Literally within the space of a month as a result of the Jim Gavin debacle. His satisfaction rating going down. The number of people who were saying he should just go.
Significantly down too.
Yeah, that was significant as well. So there did seem to be a turning of the mood. But there was nothing for Simon Harris to sing about either. Those figures weren't great, but Micheál Martin's were worse.
Yeah. I want to talk about Ivan Yates now. Where do we go with Ivan Yates? Where do we even begin with Ivan Yates? What is the latest? We know that Ivan Yates had not only coached Jim Gavin, but also had coached a number of ministers, Fianna Fáil ministers.
Yeah, so you can go back 5 years and in COVID, Ivan Yates had time in his hands like everybody else. So he put together a media coaching masterclass, and he was selling that in both business and politics, and he was doing workshops and seminars And a bunch of Fianna Fáil lads went along to that, and they weren't one-to-one sessions, they were collectives. Then subsequently he became kind of Fianna Fáil's media coach of choice. A number of people went back to him over the course of the 5 years in office, including most notably Darragh O'Brien, the housing minister, who went to him 3 times during his time as housing minister, with a number of other people as well who were going back in one-to-one sessions. Then came the European elections, and Ivan was brought in to do coaching with Barry Enders and Barry Cowan, who were kind of the 2 guys who were out an awful lot for them during that campaign, who they were pushing very heavily. They had a very successful European election campaign. That was grand. Then roll on the general election, and suddenly you had Norma Foley doing a session with him before the campaign started. And then during the campaign itself, Darragh O'Brien, James Brown, again the 2 housing ministers, incoming, outgoing, and then the biggie, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin himself. Now, Fianna Fáil haven't confirmed exactly what did Ivan do for Micheál Martin, apart from debate and interview preparation, but we're told it was for the big TV debate. Then subsequently, again, we know he was used by James Brown over the course of the last year, and so on. So, yeah, he was at his busiest with Fianna Fáil during the general election, you'd have to say, in terms of his activity. And that brings us right up to Jim Gavin being coached by him in debate prep for the interview with Sarah McInerney on Drive Time, which can only be described as a car crash. And the debate with Kieran Cuddy on Virgin Media, which can only be described as the beginning of the end of Jim Gavin's campaign.
Waving his hands around.
Waving his hands quite a lot, like the Thunderbirds. So, that was the contribution there. So, look, I suppose what it's done is it's brought another week of bad news and bad publicity onto Fianna Fáil. And this has been alluded to by people in the parliamentary party, that they just want to put this presidential election campaign behind them, really. And maybe that review will also cover this aspect. But, it's a bit disingenuous of them to basically be saying, well, sure, everybody knew that Ivan was working for us.
Well, people in the media might have known. People in the media know that
he'd done sessions
politicians.
in the past, and we certainly know that politicians get media training. Yeah.
But for the everyday listener of radio or watching TV debates or whatever, they wouldn't know that kind of thing. So how does this change?
Podcasts for that matter. And the difficulty here was that lack of a declaration of interest, that Ivan Yates was out there, even commenting upon Jim Gavin's own campaign and his performances, and at the same time was working with him. So I suppose it gets kicked on. It gets kicked on to media organisations, number one, because there's a blowback there in terms of what checks and balances people have in place in terms of people who are appearing. Because if it had been declared, by the way, Ivan Yates is coaching a candidate in this election, well, then that would have been fair enough. The listeners at home would have been aware of that, and they could have factored that in, and certainly it could have featured in terms of questioning and so on and so forth. So it's, how do you get to that point where such matters should be declared? Even Fianna Fáil are saying it should have been declared, but they're rejecting Fine Gael's suggestion that they should have been the ones doing it.
Phil, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for watching this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monahan, and don't forget, you can subscribe to the Irish Independent's YouTube channel for all the latest episodes.